Color. This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Seberide in Washington, Roger Mudd in Washington, Dan Rather at the White House, Marvin Kalb in Washington, John Lawrence in New York, and Bruce Morton in Chicago.
Good evening. Jacqueline Kennedy plans to marry Greek shipowner Aristotle Onassis, possibly within a week. The surprise announcement came from Mrs. Kennedy's mother, Mrs. Hugh Auchincloss. Onassis is one of the world's richest men, over a billionaire, and has been a long-time friend of the Kennedys. He gives his age as 62, but the New York Post says his passport gives his age as 69. The father of two grown children, Onassis was divorced by his first wife in 1960 and until recently had been linked with opera star Maria Callas. Mrs. Kennedy, 39, has been widowed almost 5 years now. With other members of the Kennedy family, has occasionally cruised the Mediterranean aboard Onassis's 325-foot-long yacht. Onassis spent 2 weekends recently at the Kennedy home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, to get to know better the Kennedy children, Caroline, 10, and John Jr., 7. But today's announcement caught almost all of Mrs. Kennedy's close friends by surprise. She had been in seclusion at her New York apartment, but emerged late today, smiling, entered a car, and was driven off. Onassis is reported to be in Athens. It was thought the marriage ceremony may be on a Greek island which he owns, and because he has been divorced, it may be a civil or a Greek Orthodox service.
Championship football calls for power, for energy, the kind you get in Wheaties. There's a kernelful of whole wheat energy in every Wheaties flake. You get protein, wheat germ, natural sugars, vitamins, and iron, all in one great-tasting whole wheat cereal. So remember, what sparks a champion sparks you. Wheaties, breakfast of champions.
No rubbers?
Lost them!
No coat?
Just mailing a letter.
What's a mother to do?
If you take vitamins during this changeable weather, take them deliciously in Total, the vitamin cereal, the only leading cereal with a whole day's vitamin supply. 1 bowl, 1 ounce, gives you 100% of every minimum daily adult vitamin requirement now set by the U.S. government.
You get your vitamins come what may when a bowl of Total starts your day.
In Vietnam, U.S. fighter bombers struck again today at North Vietnamese supply points just below the 19th parallel. But for the second straight day, the U.S. command in Saigon reported no significant ground action. Against this background, reports persisted today that a major breakthrough is near in the Paris talks aimed at ending the war. Saigon's chief observer at those talks, Pham Dong Lam, held an urgent meeting with U.S. Ambassador Harriman today, while in Saigon itself, Ambassador Bunker conferred again with President Thieu, their third meeting in less than 36 hours. But so far, the unofficial communist reaction to the reported peace moves has been less than enthusiastic, with one Hanoi newspaper today again denouncing the U.S. insistence that any total bombing halt be matched by some kind of communist de-escalation. For what's behind all this diplomatic maneuvering, CBS News correspondents Dan Rather and Marvin Kalb report from Washington. First, Rather.
The White House has confirmed through its silence that a significant new peace move is underway. Whether it leads to a total bombing halt in North Vietnam soon apparently still hangs in the balance tonight, depending on responses from Hanoi and perhaps from Saigon as well. Sources outside the White House, some of them among U.S. allies, indicate that this is the situation. The current lull in South Vietnam's ground fighting is considered a possible signal from Hanoi. President Johnson is willing to accept it as reciprocal de-escalation. If he can get assurances from Hanoi it will last, he will order a bombing halt. The Saigon government is said to be adamant on this latter point. The president has total secrecy on about all of this. The White House won't even discuss it. In his major public speaking appearance of the day, a presentation of the Presidential Unit Citation to the 5th U.S. Marine Brigade, Mr. Johnson emphasized his belief that U.S. and free world security are at stake in Vietnam.
In a tragic hour of our story, the best men that America could produce have given their limbs and their lives and their youth and left their loved ones, their wives and their babies. And they've given the fullest measure of their devotion. So that what? so that we who are privileged to stand here in the shadow of the White House today in this beautiful garden may live safely and breathe freely, and our children may grow up educated in good health and in security.
Two major questions arise out of all the new peace move speculation. Number one, has President Johnson upped his price for a total bombing halt? Under his old San Antonio formula, he had said that any little sign from Hanoi would do. And number two, if hopes for a bombing halt now fade, how badly will the letdown damage Hubert Humphrey? Dan Rather, CBS News, the White House.
The strong possibility of a bombing halt does not appear to be a political stunt designed to win votes for Hubert Humphrey. It is the result, first, of an obvious softening in Hanoi's policy, and second, in the president's willingness to see it and act upon it. A little over a month ago, Hanoi indicated to U.S. negotiators in Paris that it was prepared to exercise military restraint in South Vietnam, but as a matter of policy and face could not call it reciprocity. Quickly thereafter, a military lull developed in the South as communist forces were pulled back from the major cities and 2 divisions from the so-called demilitarized zone. At the same time, Hanoi changed its basic strategy on the war, away from Defense Minister Diop's all-out war strategy, resulting in the Tet Offensive, and towards a primary reliance on diplomacy. Moscow brought this change to Washington's attention, and after some hesitation here, the administration sent a secret proposal to Hanoi's negotiators in Paris. Its essence was that Hanoi agreed to freeze the currently reduced level of violence in exchange for a bombing halt. High officials who have been wrapped up in the Vietnam agony for years are hopeful Hanoi will accept, because they believe the North Vietnamese would really prefer to deal with a lame duck Lyndon Johnson than with the current front-runner Richard Nixon. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, Washington.
Yesterday, Republican Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen said he accepted the White House statement that there had been no movement toward Vietnam peace since he had not heard otherwise from his friend, the president. Today, Senator Dirksen said in Marion, Illinois, that he had received additional, unspecified information from Washington this morning, and he now believes, quote, something is very definitely in the making. The latest weekly casualty list released today in Saigon shows the lowest number of American combat deaths in the past 2 months. The U.S. command said 177 Americans were killed and 1,278 wounded. South Vietnamese losses were put at 176 killed. Communist deaths were given as 1,527. The talk of possible peace moves sent prices higher on the New York Stock Exchange. The volume was just over 21 million shares. That's the 3rd highest ever. The exchange index gained 28 cents.
Some dogs have it made. Easy living all the way. Other dogs have to work for their keep. But rich or poor, all dogs need the precious proteins of meat to stay at the top of their health. That's why so many dog foods promise meat in their ads. They promise meat, but fact is, almost all dog foods, canned as well as dry, are mainly cereal. Yes, mainly cereal. Now, open a can of Alpo. What a difference. Alpo is 100% meat, jam-packed with the precious proteins of meat. Radiant, broiled chunks of meat, not a speck of starchy cereal. Sure, Alpo costs more than other dog foods, naturally. Meat costs more than cereal. But see what happens to your dog when you switch him from cereal to Alpo.
Commenting on the Vietnam developments, Richard Nixon said today he would not second-guess President Johnson. If bombing can be halted without endangering American lives and with an increase in the chances for peace, Nixon said in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, then we are for it. In his words, the one man who can make that determination is the president. Let's let him make that determination. And if he makes it, we will support him because we want peace and we do not want to play politics with peace. Nixon, the president, and Hubert Humphrey attended a charity dinner together in New York last night. The $100 a plate, 2,500 guest affair was the first joint appearance of the campaign for the two candidates. John Lawrence reports.
Traditionally, the Al Smith Charity Dinner of the New York Catholic Archdiocese is a nonpartisan affair. But as it quickly developed, some nonpartisans are more partisan than other nonpartisans. First, Nixon on Humphrey.
We both come from rather humble backgrounds. Regardless of what some others may call us, he's the son of a druggist and I'm a son of a grocer. He's a former senator and I'm a former senator. He is the vice president and I was the vice president. And just 3 weeks from today, either he or I will be receiving congratulations as the winner of the election, and the other will be receiving the condolences of the loser. I've been in both positions, and winning's a lot more fun, I can assure you.
This is the kind of a country where any poor boy can grow up to be vice president. It's just one of those chances you have to take. That's all in good fun. Don't worry about it. We plan on talking to each other after November. Just depends upon where we're living. But I really thought better of my friend. I never knew that he'd aspire to live in public housing.
Then the main event of the evening, the greatest nonpartisan of them all.
Even so, I don't think any veteran could appreciate my feelings on this night, except maybe General Custer. And I don't know of any chief, executive or otherwise, who has ever been surrounded by so many Indians.
Mr. Johnson saved his subtlest thrust for Richard Nixon.
This could be my last press conference. Pretty soon you won't have Lyndon Johnson to kick around anymore.
That, of course, was a parody of Mr. Nixon's bitter comment after losing the governorship of California in 1962, a remark Mr. Nixon considers the most painful and embarrassing of his career. But in the end, nonpartisanship prevailed, and the evening wound up with what is probably the ecumenical picture of the year. John Lawrence, CBS News, New York.
Humphrey's campaign in New York got a boost today from the state's highest court. Unanimously, the court ruled off the ballot the name of Senator Eugene McCarthy as the presidential candidate of a coalition of anti-Vietnam groups. McCarthy himself had joined with the regular Democratic organization in seeking that court decision. George Wallace, canceling campaign appearances tomorrow in Kansas and Missouri, planned to return to Alabama from Texas tonight. An aide said Wallace's doctor ordered the change, adding in these words, "The governor is beaten down by complete physical exhaustion. They're taking him home and putting him right to bed." At Fort Worth, Wallace conceded that he's tired, but he denied that fatigue caused the change schedule. He said he was going home to make television tapes.
You get many different descriptions of a common complaint.
It's a stuffy, uncomfortable feeling for me.
It's a tense, burning sensation. Rotten, miserable. Whatever you call heartburn and acid indigestion, Digel relieves the symptoms. Digel, the extra action antacid, neutralizes excess acid and has the extra action of simethicone to break up bubbles of gas, to help relax your tense, tight stomach. Digel, the extra action antacid.
Watch. There's going to be an accident. For those stinging cuts and scrapes, spray away pain with Solar Cane. Solar Cane stops skin pain faster, more effectively than ordinary first aids that contain no pain-killing ingredients. Solar Cane spray, lotion, or cream all contain benzocaine, medication used by doctors. Stop skin pain with Solar Cane. For minor burns, cuts, and scrapes. Solar Cane.
Senator Edmund Muskie voiced optimism today that the Democratic ticket's fortunes are on the rise. He said he'd be very surprised if the next national polls do not reflect a gain. Muskie commented as he campaigned in Chicago. And Bruce Morton reports.
Senator Muskie came to Chicago's Loop today with all the panoply of the old politics. The first Democratic motorcade here since the party wounded itself on these streets last August. The leading figure of that drama, Mayor Richard Daley, rode by the candidate's side. All the props worked. Bands, streamers, ticker tape imprinted with the candidate's name. But the crowds were sparse, perhaps a quarter of the number George Wallace drew here, and mostly silent. A few Nixon signs and no Democratic dissent appeared along the way. Inside, the old politics ruled again. Corned beef and cabbage led the menu, and the slightly embarrassed-looking Muskie listened as every local candidate was introduced and cheered. The band played Irish songs. Muskie's speech, forceful and direct as always, included a strong attack on George Wallace. Muskie called him a demagogue.
It can happen here if we do not recognize and expose George Wallace for the threat that he is. Depriving him of the presidency on November 5th is not enough. He must be defeated so soundly that his kind of concept of our society will never rise again.
Muskie's success this year is not based on the old politics of a Daily Machine lunch, and the veteran Daily men hearing him must have sensed that their old political truths are changing. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Chicago.
This is Eric Severide in Washington. No matter how the election goes on November 5th, one of its 6 leading figures cannot lose. The lanky Downeastern Senator Edmund Muskie. The impact that the relatively obscure ex-governor of Maine has made on audiences and on the hard-boiled political press around the country is the surprise of an otherwise unsurprising campaign. It reinforces the feeling that what most Americans in this troubled year really seek is not a set of policy positions, but a man they can instinctively trust because of his nature as a man. This seems to be the key to Muskie's success as a campaigner, his believability. What he projects is the opposite of what we have all been told a candidate these days must have: glamour, style, compelling rhetoric. If Muskie is compelling to many audiences, it is not because of fine-spun rhetoric. It's because of something so old it now seems new and fresh: simplicity, believability. If any of the candidates is having a truly happy experience this fall, it is Muskie. He realizes that the loss of anonymity is a serious loss. He can no longer walk down a city street without being recognized, but he is a politician who plays politics for keeps, and he is glad to have now a national constituency. He has nowhere to go in politics but up. He would rather win than lose on November 5th, but he refuses to lie awake nights worrying about the electoral outcome. He learned long ago that a state of unanxiety about the result leaves him free to say exactly what he believes. So Muskie is doing no fretting, calculating, or worrying. It was no problem to him to take the private advice of Harry Truman: speak the truth and be yourself. He has gone everywhere, including the ghettos, where his opposite number, Mr. Agnew, will not go. He has used tough language on raucous hecklers and won them over. He has delighted audiences of college students, the vast majority of whom he finds immensely decent. He has held Mountain Valley farmers in a kind of religious thrall with his talk about the meaning of this country, its dangers, and what its people must do to preserve the great tradition. His journeys have persuaded him that what most deeply troubles people now is a dark fear in their hearts that trust has broken down between Americans. He has tried to tell them that the healing process must begin with them, that they must learn to trust even those they fear, even those who might do them injury. Risk is what gives meaning to trust. And this land, indeed, was built on risk and trust. Alert.
The Apollo 7 astronauts now are into the second half of their planned 11-day journey around the Earth. The quality of the day's broadcast from the capsule again was impaired by ground equipment troubles, as you can see here. The day's show dealt primarily with an explanation and demonstration of weightlessness, and the astronauts reported they're using their feet a great deal. As Cunningham put it, it's kind of like a monkey moving around in his cage. Hurricane Gladys today shifted course slightly to the north and now is expected to strike Florida's west coast tomorrow along a thinly populated area 80 miles north of Tampa. Winds in the center of the storm now are clocked at about 75 miles an hour. A fact-finding panel headed by an expert labor negotiator began work today trying to find a way to reopen New York City's closed public schools. Meantime, striking teachers, supported by other unions, massed by the thousands for a rally outside City Hall. And Robert Shackney reports.
This is an extraordinary demonstration for New York City. The teachers' union had called for 40,000 people in a show of support for its strike, and the streets and parks around New York City Hall are simply packed with humanity. The union holds to the position that this is a labor dispute. Job security and due process are the issues. Other unions are backing the teachers. But in this crowd, the racial overtones are equally visible. The crowd is almost all white. The enemy of the crowd, the largely Negro local school board in Brooklyn. And equally now, the enemy of the crowd, Mayor John Lindsay, whose name has been roundly booed. There's been no violence. This has been an orderly demonstration, but a highly emotional demonstration. And it perhaps also is a political obituary for John Lindsay, for one time, these were his people. Robert Shackney, CBS News, at City Hall in New York City.
In Stockholm, the 1968 Nobel Prize in Literature today was awarded to Japanese novelist Yasumari Kawabata. The 69-year-old writer is almost unknown outside his own country.
The day they stole the cream corn secret.
In the valley of the Jolly Green Giant.
Oh, they stole the patented process, all right, but what they didn't know...
What didn't we know?
They didn't know that to make his cream-style corn, the Giant starts with his own Niblets brand corn, that tender, sweet corn grown only by the Giant. Then he creams the corn by his patented process, so it's the sweetest and smoothest of all. Try it. It's easy to get.
Yeah? How easy?
Just look for Green Giant brand cream-style corn. Anytime you want vegetables that steal the show for flavor, go straight for the ones that say Green Giant.
Go straight? Go straight.
From the valley of the Jolly Green Giant.
Campaign 68, like none other in a half-century, has dramatized the peculiarities in the way Americans choose their president, the Electoral College system. And George Wallace's strong third-party campaign could call into play seldom-used provisions of that system. Roger Mudd examines the possibilities.
If a former truck driver who was married to a former dime store clerk and whose father was a plain dirt farmer can't be elected president, then can he at least throw the election into the House of Representatives? The answer is, for George Wallace, probably not. But if he did, it would be the first time since 1824 in the contest between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. It would also set in motion a series of constitutional steps so complicated that it boggles the mind, literally puts the nation's presidency and cabinet on the trading block, and exposes the country's political stability to tearing strains. Assume for the next few moments that it is November 5th, late that night, and a jubilant George Wallace and his American Independent Party have carried 7 southern states with a total of 66 electoral votes. However, in the other 43 states, neither Humphrey nor Nixon has been able to amass enough electoral votes, 270, to win without Wallace. 40 days later, December 16th, at the 50 state capitals, the presidential electors meet to cast their ballots. Because only 15 states require their electors by law to vote for their party's presidential candidate, there is the possibility that exploratory negotiations between Wallace and Nixon or Humphrey could break the stalemate if 270 electors could combine behind one candidate. But again assume the electors vote as expected. There is no change. There still is no president. It is here that the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. The central point to remember is that in the balloting for president on January 6, 1969, the House votes not by individual members, but by states, and that each state has one vote. This means that before Illinois, for instance, can cast its one vote, Illinois' 24 congressmen must ballot among themselves to decide. But if the Illinois delegation is split down the middle, as it now is, 12 Democrats and 12 Republicans, and cannot decide, then it cannot cast its one vote. Obviously, this procedure places a premium on party control of at least 26 of the 50 state delegations in the House. At present, the
party control map of Congress looks like this. The Democrats control 28 delegations, the Republicans 18, and 4, Illinois, Montana, Pennsylvania, and Oregon, are evenly divided. To guarantee Richard Nixon's election in the House, the Republican Party, therefore, will have to hold the 18 it has now and pick up control of 8 more delegations. GOP strategists admit the job will not be easy. There are now only 7 states where a shift of 1 seat would give the Republicans delegation control: Illinois, Kentucky, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. But control of Kentucky, Nevada, and Oregon seem beyond the party's reach. It will have to look elsewhere, California perhaps, or North Carolina, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Colorado. But only a massive Nixon landslide will give the GOP those 8 new delegations, in which case the presidential election would have been settled November 5th anyway. If the Republicans did make major gains in the new House, President Johnson conceivably could call the old and heavily Democratic Congress back into session after the November election to amend the law so that the present House would pick the president. Such a blatant maneuver obviously would succumb to a Republican filibuster in the Senate. But what would happen if the election did go into the new House on January 6th, with the Republicans controlling only 22 delegations, 4 short of a majority? Would Hubert Humphrey automatically be guaranteed the presidency? Not necessarily. Built into the Democratic control of the House are George Wallace's 7 southern states, and already there are signs Humphrey cannot count on their votes. Take Virginia with 10 congressmen, 6 Democrats and 4 Republicans. Under normal circumstances, Virginia's 1 vote would be cast for the Democratic nominee. But 3 Democrats, Dave Satterfield in the 3rd District, Dan Daniels in the 5th, Jack Marsh in the 7th, have announced they will vote in caucus for the nominee who carries their district, be he Humphrey, Nixon, or Wallace. The upshot is that even though the GOP controls only 20 or 21 of the 50 delegations in the new House, it could, with the help of the Wallace state delegations, elect Richard Nixon, or at least deadlock the whole process. In the case of a stalemate, it would then be up to the Senate to pick from between the top 2 vice presidential candidates an acting president. Because the Senate is certainly to be controlled by the Democrats, the nation's first acting president probably would be Edmund Sixtus Muskie. But suppose the Humphrey-Muskie ticket ran 3rd. Then the choice for acting president would be between Spiro Theodore Agnew and, believe it or not, Curtis Emerson LeMay. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the way it is. Thursday, October 17th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Benson and Hedges 100s are 3 pups, 4 pups, maybe 5 pups longer than king size.
The electro-coated Persona gives such a smooth, comfortable shave. Why shouldn't injector users have a smooth, comfortable shave, too? Introducing the electro-coated injector blade.
Direct from our newsroom in New York.